Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Living in the Light. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and we're continuing with our discussion of this little pamphlet, A New Dispensation, which has been reprinted and looks much more attractive than this, but the contents are still just the same. Just a sec. Okay. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, Divine Friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. Help us to feel your living presence, to understand the words that Swamiji has written, that we may see how they are a living truth in our own lives. Help us to fully receive the grace of your presence which surrounds us. Liberate us from our smallness of heart, our smallness of imagination, and draw us into the greatness of our true relationship with thee. Om. Peace. Amen. Okay, my friends. So we're making our way through this little pamphlet. I stopped reading and was extrapolating on some of the implications of it for a couple of days here. So now we pass through the paragraph with the 4 points of attunement: those who serve selflessly, those who try to act as a channel for the light, those who seek attunement with those more advanced, and those who realize that attunement is more important even than long hours of meditation, if the meditation lacks the effort also to be in tune. So these points are very subtle. I think I've mentioned to you, this was written in 1983, and I've been aware of it and I've studied it many times. And even as I'm going through it now with all of you, I'm just learning what he was trying to say better, and presumably I'll learn it better the next time. When Swamiji was very much at the end of his life, the last, 5 or 6 years, I remember him lamenting. He was in a little bit of a, I don't want to say depressed, but he was, what kind of word would you describe it? I don't want to try to whitewash it. He was just reflecting on his life, and he was feeling uncertain. He was just feeling uncertain about the past and the future. Actually, now that I'm starting on it, it was very, very poignant, but it was also became humorous in the end. He was just, now let me just see if I can find exactly what I want to say. We were in the Sisi. I believe it was there was a month-long period where the entire staff of Ananda Sisi went to India together. And in order to make that possible, David and I came over there basically to take the roles that were played by Ananda and Kirtani and Leela, who was his housekeeper, and Lakshman, who was his secretary. So companionship, driver, writing, taking care of his correspondence, and cooking. And Leela's husband, David Hogendijk, had just passed away a few months earlier, and whereas normally she would never leave him, everyone, including Swami, felt that she needed a full change of scenery. So she left, and because I and we were willing to come, all of that was possible. So Swamiji was reflecting nostalgic was part of it, but it was also a kind of sad nostalgia. Just thinking about the separation from the SRF devotees, thinking about what he felt to be a lack of awareness on Dayamata's part of some of the things that she had done. The observation about how some of the older disciples, direct disciples, some were having a little bit of dementia, things like that. It was very poignant, very serious for Swami to see how things had evolved and that they didn't look like they were going to change. Didn't look like there was going to be a reconciliation with SRF. He so profoundly and deeply wanted Dayamata to repudiate what he felt were some of her errors, influenced especially by Tara. So all of that, it was a very heartfelt time. And we were just in this cafe. I think it was just the two of us. David must have been doing something else. And we were just talking, and he wanted me to listen. He was just talking about the struggles of the spiritual path, how even great souls can fall into delusion, how none of us are really safe, how Master, this is it, I remember also, at the end of Master's life, Master began to repudiate this world in a way that he hadn't done before. Swami hints at it in the path when he talks about one of the disciples who'd served Master her whole life, one of the women, standing in the hallway outside Master's room, weeping. She says, "There's just nothing I can do to please him. Everything I do, he rejects." And she was crying because she couldn't find a harmony with him that she'd always had. And Swamiji said it was Master himself. He felt, being at the end of his life, just needing to repudiate this world in order to be able to leave it, and also to put people perhaps on their own. And Swami was just reflecting about all of this, and it was hard. I mean, it was hard for my heart. It was hard for his heart. It was also important to realize that even though consciousness may be very expanded, it goes all the way. It goes all the way from the most human up to the divine. And there's much about the human level that's exceedingly poignant. Master commented about he had to live at a time when there were 3 wars, World War I and II, plus the Korean War. And he was conscious of all that suffering all the time. He contrasted that to Lahiri Mahashaya. There weren't any wars during Lahiri Mahashaya's lifetime. So being aware of the suffering on the battlefield and the heartbreak of the wives and mothers and children whose men are killed didn't make Master any less aware of God's presence behind it, but a Master's not made of stone. This was actually a very deep learning for me over many years with Swamiji. The difference between transcendence and suppression. Because you can transcend something, and actually, this is just me talking, but this is what I believe, you still experience it. It's just, it becomes, the pain of it is part of the beauty of the divine. The way Swami put it, when he would see people suffering, he would think, oh, how much more beautiful then will be the moment when they realize God. So that the anguish that people have to go through to come to that bliss is part of what makes the bliss so radiant, is that it's a long struggle before we get there. So Swami would weep, and Master wept at the struggle people had to go through. But when we're going through that struggle, often we can't simultaneously remember that this will end in bliss, whereas the Masters always know it'll end in bliss. But it's a bit like climbing Mount Everest, I would think. You know you're going to make it. I mean, if you're watching the movie for the second time, you know you're going to make it to the top of the mountain and down again safely. But that doesn't mean during the time you're walking up and the wind is blowing and you've lost your glove and your hand is freezing and your boots are inadequate for the cause and you can barely breathe because there's so little oxygen, all of that is also happening. And I used to be dismissive in a sense of those experiences, or even more, I suppressed those experiences within myself. I was afraid to experience them. I needed to believe in the happy ending, and I didn't have the courage to face the climb. So I thought that what Swami was doing was not feeling it. I thought transcendence meant not to feel it. But that's not true. At least I don't believe that's true now. I believe you feel it very, very deeply. But, well, I'll quote Betsy ten Boom, who was the great saintly Christian woman who died in one of the Nazi concentration camps for helping the Jews. She and her sister, Corey, were there. Corey lived, Betsy didn't. Betsy, just before she died, said to Corey that, I'm going to die, you're going to live through this, you're going to have to go around the world and tell people, and this is what she said, that no pit of suffering is so deep that the love of Jesus is not deeper still. And Betsy said to Corey, they will believe you because you've been here. And that's what Betsy was able to experience, that despite all the darkness of everything, there was a deeper level underneath it in which Jesus was always there. He was always sustaining them. Like St. Anthony in the tomb, when the tomb was about to be smashed on his head by the come-to-life monsters of the devil that were just all around him. And finally, and Anthony refused to repudiate Jesus, despite the fact that they were going to crash, the devils were going to crash the tomb down on his head. And finally, Jesus appeared. And in that light, all that darkness just disappeared. And Anthony said, Lord, where were you? I mean, if you were always with me, why did I have to go through this? Lord, where were you? And then we have Master's voice telling the story, so some of us hear it in Master's voice. Anthony, Jesus said, I was always the same with you. Amazing, isn't it? These are mysteries that have lingered at the edge of my consciousness for all these years, and only very, very slowly have I been able to penetrate. The veils of delusion, some of the early ones, they're just easier to get rid of. I don't really particularly want to be famous. I don't need to be rich. The only time I ever want to be rich is when I'm having a massage, a therapeutic massage, and I would love to have a masseuse that just sat in the hallway and was just available to me whenever I wanted on my full-time staff, and I could invite the masseuse in. There's a little tight spot on my shoulder. Could you fix it right here? That's the only time I ever wish to be wealthy. Otherwise, I'm just fine. But there's just lots of things in the world that are just, I don't want to set myself up for a fall, but they're easy to penetrate. They're just not attractive. I don't want to drink. I don't like heavy, rich food. There's just lots of things that are easy. But these, you get really, really subtle. You get really subtle. So Swamiji, to come all the way back to where we were sitting in this cafe in Assisi, and he was just talking to me about, I think the word would be, it was tiresome. What he was having was intense, the anguishing monotony. That's what it was. That would be the exact word for what he was expressing to me. He was in the anguishing monotony of it, not as a clever phrase, but in the anguishing part of it. Just this is the way the world unfolds, even among devotees. It's unbearable. And that was what he was describing to me, and it was so real. There was nothing to do but be as empathetic as I possibly could with him. So he expressed all of that, and we were in town for a while, and then we drove back to Assisi, and then I was going to cook for him, and we were sitting together in the living room. By now, he had sort of gotten it out of his system. And as often happens whenever we fall into something really dark, as it begins to lighten, one realizes that there's no point in being so dramatic. And a kind of just slightly, just a tiny bit of humor begins to come in, because often that's what breaks the darkness. When I asked Swamiji the question of what is humor at one point, he said to a certain extent it's a spiritual quality, because it requires a sufficient flexibility of mind to be able to just turn and see a situation from a completely different angle. And even something that's quite serious, you just turn and see it from a completely different angle, and then that allows you to see it as humorous. So as the anguishing monotony of life itself began to ease a little bit, Swami was still saying these words, there's some of the same words, but I felt this rising, even as I think about it, this rising inclination to chuckle. Because also, in our lives together, many times, Swamiji would set the tone, but others of us would follow it, where you would make fun in yourself, not in someone else, but make fun of yourself by exaggerating what might otherwise be, just such a miserable attitude. You just play it instead of actually doing it, so that it reminds you that it's not necessary. So Swami was just crossing over into the point where he was exaggerating the melancholy more and more, and the little smile was beginning to come on the side of my mouth, and I could feel it in his too. This was over the course of an hour or two that this happened. And finally I said, well, sir, let's see, how did it go? Let me just think. It was time for me to cook him lunch, and Swami liked his lunch very regularly. And I know what it was, but I kept sitting in the living room with him, and I couldn't bring myself to go into the kitchen, which was a separate room. And finally, he sort of asked, or he said something about lunch, and I said, well, sir, I'm concerned. His house was 2 stories, and the living room had a balcony, and the balcony, because it was a hill, it was like about a story and a half up, and the balcony was right off the living room. I said, well, sir, I really need to go and fix you lunch, but I'm afraid to leave you for fear you're going to throw yourself off the balcony. And I said, I just don't know what else to offer you except euthanasia. By then it was an okay thing to say. So he said, well, you could fix me a very good Indian lunch. I said, in lieu of euthanasia. Just give him like the incentive to live for another hour and a half, because I was about to fix him a meal that he would want to eat. And he agreed that would keep him off the balcony for that period of time. And by then, nothing had changed. This is the remarkable thing about consciousness, you see. Nothing had changed. Everything that Swamiji had said was true. I think he might have commented about the struggles he was having with his health. Just the endless, unrelenting willpower required to establish a work. Master Swami wasn't complaining. He was just commenting. He was just commenting on the experience, and he was sharing it with me also so that I would understand, that this is what happens. We can't resist it. We can't pretend that we failed. We can't be afraid of it. The anguishing monotony is real, and it definitely comes up, and when it comes up, there it is. But in any case, that was what I was remembering. How I started there, I don't even know. But anyway, there we are. So, now, I will read a little bit here to the next section here. So we've gone through attunement, and this section he calls it a special dispensation, attunement, the divine ray. These are the sections of this brochure. I remember in this context, so what context would have been? This is a special dispensation, I think Swami's saying. Over the years, I've made a few specific observations, and those were the observations I mentioned, those who serve, those who attune. I remember in this context a certain woman disciple of this path, a resident of the SRF community in Encinitas. The chief impression she made on me was the joy and peace that she radiated. One day she approached our guru with the news, "I'm leaving this path. I've found another guru." "Very well," the master replied respectfully. "I withdraw my ray." Wow. "Very well, I withdraw my ray." Master replied respectfully. Bear in mind what St. John says in the Bible, to all who received him. We look at that statement of St. John's from many different angles, to all who received him. When we do the purification ceremony, we have done it and we still do it online, the disciple says, the devotee says, "I seek purification by the grace of God." And you're kneeling before the light bearer, and the light bearer is acting as an instrument of the master's. Then the light bearer speaks, but they're speaking for the master. The master says, "Open your heart to me, and I will enter and take charge of your life." So there's the request by the devotee, then there's the requirement by the master, "Open your heart to me, and then I will enter, but open your heart to me." So this woman says, "Well, I've been your guru, I've been your disciple, but now I found another guru." Respectfully, master says, "Very well then, I withdraw my ray." And master's not punishing him. There's another factor here that's actually very interesting, which I'll go on and read this in a minute, which is it would be inappropriate for master to continue to guide her if she is now looking to someone else for guidance. There's been a cycle that's happened at Ananda, not surprisingly, that people come into our community, even live for a period of time, but then some other teacher will come to their attention and they will feel that in fact they belong somewhere else, because we're not the only path. I mean, this is my path, but it's not the path. There are countless others. Self-realization as a principle is a unifying factor, but many roads lead to self-realization. So various people have shifted, sometimes after years, to be disciples of other masters. And on occasion, people will still come back to Swamiji for various reasons and want him to instruct them. And his answer is, "I can't. You've given your loyalty and you've opened your heart to another line of teaching. It would not be appropriate for me to guide you now. You have to look. You have to look to where you've gone." And there have been a few people in my life also who've gone to another expression of Lahiri's Kriya Yoga, but not this one. And I've remained cordial with them and talked to them, but on the few occasions when it's come up, I've had to say it's not for me to say, because what I'm offering you, and you see, this is where you have to come to what this whole thing is about. I'm offering you attunement with this particular ray, but if this isn't the ray that you want to be attuned to, then it would be both confusing and inappropriate for me to try to help you do this, because anything specific about what you should do, and goes back to what Swami is saying here, attunement with the ray is where the real transformation comes from. It's not from just exactly knowing how to say the mantra right, or whether or not I put this particular item on my altar, or face in this way, or do this mudra. All of that is for the sake of being in tune, because it's the attunement that allows the grace to come into you. So if you're trying to be attuned to a slightly different ray, then I and Swami in that position, I have nothing to offer you. Now, you may still learn ideas and inspirations and philosophy. All of that can still be true, but there's a more subtle level there that I remember the surprise in this one particular woman's mind. She didn't live with us anymore, but she thought Swami would still respond to her in the same way he always had. But she opened her heart in another direction. And that's why Master said, very well then, respectfully, I withdraw my ray. You're trying to be in tune in another direction, so I don't want to interfere with that. Also, it's notable, the woman did not ask. She informed. And of course, that's the difference right there. And the same has been true in every circumstance that I referred to. Swami wasn't asked, he was informed. So the decision is already made. Very well, the Master replied respectfully, I withdraw my ray. A year later, she returned for a visit. To our sorrow, the joy and peace in her eyes were no longer there. She looked like any other worldly person, asleep to higher realities. You know, that the way Swami describes that is exactly what I've seen. And I'm not speaking about people who've necessarily gone to other paths, but people who have withdrawn altogether. And they just look like ordinary people. I've also seen it sometimes in children who used to attend our school, but then for various reasons their karma did not keep them in our school, and they went off to be in other schools. And whereas they had this very bright light in their eyes, of course children grow and time changes. But I have to honestly say that I've seen it. I've seen exactly that same thing, that there's a certain glow about being associated with this ray. And if you withdraw from it, as Swami said, to our dismay, she just didn't look the same as she had looked. I don't know if that's a comment on her guru or what, but it wasn't there. That's all Swami could say. Her example helped me to realize the truth of what our guru often implied in his talks with us, that through our connection with him, we were affiliated with an actual ray of divine power, a power far transcending even such great blessings as true teachings, scientific meditation techniques, and the saintly example of a great master of yoga. Paramhansa Yogananda would tell his students, you're not connected with a mere organization, but with the divine power flowing through a line of self-realized masters. Again, he would repeat, this work is a special dispensation sent from God. So this is again going back to the 4 points that Swami raised, trying to be an instrument of this teaching, meditating even long hours without a corresponding effort to be in tune. This is something that we always have to keep in mind. Sometimes even when we start communicating or trying to share with others what we're doing, we talk about Kriya Yoga, what a magnificent technique Kriya is. And if you come to Ananda, you can be initiated into Kriya Yoga. Ours is a path of Kriya Yoga. And all of that is true. But even long hours of meditation, even dedicated effort to doing hundreds of Kriyas, is a means to an end. And what it does is it eliminates from our consciousness the conflicting cross currents of delusionary thought, so that we can align our awareness with this pure vibration of the masters. And Kriya is an essential practice, or let us say, and it's an extraordinarily effective and helpful practice, because if we practice it with a corresponding effort to be in tune, then that ray of grace will come into us and our consciousness will be changed. The light that shines from the eyes of people who are dedicated to spiritual practice as through this line of gurus, it's not the light of our own self-discipline. It's the light of surrendering and experiencing and receiving to all those who received him. This is a lifetime of meditation to get clear, which is why I'm spending so much time with it here. And I'm so grateful to Master for inspiring me to do it, because even as I try to explain these things to you, they're becoming more and more clear in my own heart, which is the great joy of this path, that it keeps expanding in front of us until we ourselves become infinite. Bless you.